Hello and welcome to this course on epistemology. So before I tell you anything else, let's ask the question, what exactly is epistemology? Well, it's one of the subfields of philosophy, just as there is logic and philosophy of science and political philosophy and ethics and so on. There is a subfield of philosophy called epistemology. It is also called the philosophy of knowledge, because that is the topic that is central in epistemology. Knowledge. Human beings attempt to know the world. Now, you might think that every course you could possibly take at a university has to do with knowledge, right? If you take a course in marine biology, you're trying to gain knowledge of animals living in the sea. And if you're taking a course in ancient Mesopotamian history, you're trying to get knowledge about ancient Mesopotamian history. And that's right? Whenever we are engaged in any kind of research, whenever we are engaged in any kind of education, really, we are concerned with knowledge. Now, what is special about a course in the philosophy of knowledge is that we are not so much trying to transmit knowledge, although I am going to be trying to teach you something and transmit some knowledge, but that we are trying to think about knowledge. We're going to ask questions about what knowledge is, what is involved in knowing things, in how and when and whether we can get knowledge, in why we would even want to have knowledge, and so on and so forth. So the philosophy of knowledge is an attempt to think through this notion of knowledge and its many applications in, our understanding of ourselves, in our understanding of our relation to the world, in our understanding of science, and so on and so forth. Now, this question of knowledge has been central to philosophy, both Western philosophy and a lot of non-Western philosophy, forever, basically. If you go back, for instance, to the ancient Greeks, questions about knowledge and how we can get knowledge and so on and so forth are absolutely central to the kind of thinking that they are doing. And so one way to teach a course of philosophy is to teach it historically. We could look at, say, the epistemology of the pre-Socratics, and then the epistemology of Plato, and then the epistemology of Aristotle, and then slowly move our way towards the present. That's not what I'm going to do in this course. I'm going to follow what is a pretty standard, in many ways, curriculum for an epistemology course in a contemporary university setting, which means that I'm going to be focusing on questions in epistemology and theories in epistemology that are popular, that people are discussing right now. So this is going to be very much a contemporary course, focusing on contemporary, like living usually, or only recently dead philosophers and their ideas and the debates that they are engaged in, like in the past couple of decades or something like that. There are benefits, like advantages and disadvantages to doing either of these things. I think it's very useful, very important to have a historical background. I also think it's very useful and important to know, the kind of debates that are being held right now. In a course, I have to more or less focus on one of these things, although, of course, now and then I will make some historical remarks. We're going to be focusing mainly on contemporary thinking in epistemology. And if you are knowledgeable about the philosophical landscape a little bit, then we're going to be focusing, I can add for you that we're going to be focusing mostly on epistemology in what we can roughly call the analytic part of philosophy. So I'm not going to be spending a lot of time at all really talking about specifically epistemological questions in contemporary continental philosophy. If that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry, you can set it aside for now. Okay, so what are we going to do in a course on epistemology? Well, we're going to ask a lot of questions, and we're going to try to answer those questions, and maybe in some cases we're going to arrive at real answers, and of course in many cases, as happens in philosophy, we're going to get confused, we're going to generate only more questions, but still a kind of insight might develop from sort of delving deeper into these topics and generating more questions that we can ask ourselves. So to give you a sort of brief overview of the kinds of topics that we'll be covering during this course, I am actually going to read out a list of questions for you. And these are going to be some of the central questions of the videos, the lectures, the weeks that follow. So, first of all, well, actually not first of all, but it's sort of the central question maybe here. What is knowledge? It's first of all in this list, but it's not going to be first of all in the questions that I'll try to answer during the course. But what is knowledge, right? If we are teaching a course on epistemology, taking a course on epistemology, well, this should be one of the central things we're interested in. If we're talking about knowledge, what is it, right? And what makes it different maybe from other things that we also might be interested in? What makes it different from just believing something? Or what makes it different from truth? Or what makes it different from understanding something? And so on and so forth. So what is knowledge? Second, but first in the order in which I'll discuss it in the course, why should we care about it? Right? What's the point? What is the value of knowledge? Right? If it's something that we're after, if it's something that we are even spending an entire course on, if it's something that, is the subject matter of a core part of philosophy, it's probably worth something. It's probably good maybe to have it, but in what sense and why? So the value of knowledge. Then another very important question, well, can we have any knowledge? Right? And here we hear the eternal question of skepticism, right? Where the skeptic claims or worries that we can't have any knowledge. And most philosophers have tried to argue against the skeptic that, don't worry, we can have knowledge. We can have non-trivial knowledge. We can have knowledge of the things that we care about. Okay, can we? That's going to be one of the questions that we want to ask. If we can have it, how do we get it? Right? What is the way that we human beings are going to be able to get at that knowledge? Well, that's a question that I'll discuss, although not in as much detail as I could. Some of that question, like answers to that question that delve deeply into like specific methods for gaining knowledge, would fit better in a course on philosophy of science. And at Leiden University, philosophy of science is a separate course from epistemology. So I'll be relatively brief about sort of methodological questions like that. But of course, the question of how we get at knowledge, how we try to reach it, is going to come up. And we are going to try to say something about that. So when we think about knowledge, we also can't escape a sort of more metaphysical question lurking in the background, which is the question of, what is the relation between us, the knowers, and the objects that we're trying to know, right? The world. What is the relation between us and the world? For instance, when we perceive the world, what is the relation between us and the world? What happens in something like perception if we look at it through the eyes of an epistemologist? Those are questions in the philosophy of perception, but also questions in like very hardcore metaphysics that we absolutely need to put on the table. And if that's the type of question that we're asking, it wouldn't be amiss to also ask, well, and what exactly is truth? Right? I mean, if we are trying to gain knowledge, we're probably trying to learn the truth, but what is that? What is truth? Okay. If we ask something like, what is truth? Then another set of questions about our relation to the truth and our relation to each other also comes to the fore. And that's something that we're spending a lot of time talking about how knowledge has to do, what knowledge has to do with not just us as knowers, but also the relations between different knowers. And so we'll ask things like, is knowledge the same for everyone? Or is there such a thing as, knowledge for me and knowledge for you, which could somehow be different? Can reasonable people disagree? Right? And you might say, yes, of course, reasonable people disagree all the time. But when you try to think it through, it's actually kind of mysterious how reasonable people could disagree. So that's a topic that we'll want to think about. Is knowledge based on trusting other people or not? Is it based on sort of always being critical towards other people? Can knowledge play some kind of neutral role in society, right? So that if we are in conflict, we can just say to each other, okay, let's check the facts, right? Where knowledge would be neutral And we, don't have to worry when it comes to knowledge about existing structures in society, for instance. Or is it impossible to divorce knowledge from the structures of society? And do we have to take that on board in any serious epistemology? Can we as philosophers, or what can we as philosophers say about, like, in the news topics like the post-truth society, or fake news, or echo chambers? Those are topics that we'll be wanting to look into as well. And what are the ethical and political implications of the kind of thinking about knowledge that we develop throughout this course? Okay, so what we're seeing is that we can, start out maybe from what sound like simple definitional questions like, what exactly is knowledge? But very soon we are going to end up asking questions about the value of knowledge, which are in some sense questions about who are we, like what are values for us? Questions that have to do with like very deep metaphysical things, like what is the relation between us and the world, and questions that have to do with ethics and politics. And one of the things that makes epistemology such a fascinating subject is precisely that in thinking about knowledge, all these different parts of philosophy, like ethics, political philosophy, logic, philosophy of science, metaphysics, they sort of all come together, right? They are all relevant to epistemology, and epistemology is relevant to all of them. And I hope we can see some of that happening in this course, can see some of that interplay happening as this course unfolds. So, epistemology, it's a very broad, in that sense, topic, a very broad field. I'll try to capture some of the broadness. It's also a fairly dynamic field in philosophy. There's been a lot of changes. Like if you had been following an epistemology course like 20 years ago, it would probably focus very much on the theoretical issues about what is knowledge, how does justification work. But nowadays there's a lot of work done on those more practical and societal aspects of knowledge. And I'm very happy to be able to put all of that together in one package, in one introductory course. So I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I do. And as I said, we are going to start by delving into the value of true belief and the value of knowledge.